Good morning, everybody. My name is Corinne D'Antonio, and I'm a postdoc fellow in linguistics at the Oriental Studies Department in Sapienza University in Rome. And today we are going to present the application of the category of case as proposed by this famous Japanese grammarian, whose name is Yamada Yoshio, who is well known among Japanese scholars for the vast influence his approach had on several aspects concerning the description of the Japanese language. And as far as my presentation is concerned, the two aspects that are significant are that he is the father of the classification of the Japanese particles, which is still applied today in the description of every stage of the language. And second, that he is the first to use the expression case particles, which in Japanese is kakujoshi, that is still used today to identify the particular category of morphemes that express case. But we will see, and this is the principal aim of my presentation, that his definition of case is quite different from our understanding, and this will lead to question and rethink the notion of case particles that he proposes and the distinction between these particles and other classes of particles. So we will start by briefly showing his framework that is introduced for the first time in this text, Nihonbun Poron in 1908, in which he describes the Japanese language, drawing examples from Old and Middle Japanese, so not from contemporary Japanese. And the same approach is, however, applied in other textbooks, as you can see here. And let us see briefly how his classification works. So in general, Yamada distinguishes two types of words, which are concept words that his understanding are nouns, pronouns, numerals, adjectives, verbs, conjunctions, and every part of the speech. And then we have relation words. Relation words are the only category particles are the only category to be regarded as relation words. So the function of relation words in Yamada is to express the relation between concept words. Particles in particular are morphemes that do not inflect, that are places right after their head, and that help clarifying the value, the function, or the meaning of the element that they mark. So particles are further divided by Yamada in a six-fold classification, in which we have the case particles, which is probably the most important one. Case particles attached to nominals and adverbs, and this is important, and express their case, which Yamada defines as the fixed relation that nominals and adverbs have with other concept words. Examples of case particles are, as you can see here, I gave the values in contemporary Japanese. So for example, ga, which is regarded to be the marker of the subject, the attributive no, direct object o, for example, motion to e, commutative to, and so on. So as you can see, in this class includes both morphemes expressing supposedly syntactic relations and those expressing specific semantic roles like motion from. Now, Yamada is not the first to use the term kaku, case, to describe these morphemes, because already other scholars before him distinguished morphemes expressing case, that is kaku, from other kinds of morphemes. But he is the first to use the expression kakujoshi, so case particles, which would be borrowed from other scholars and would be applied ever since. So, however, case particles are separated from other kinds of particles that specifically are, for example, adverbial particles, which follow nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, and express like limitation or gradation in the meaning. And for example, they mean even, only, merely, nothing but, and so on. Then we have conjunctional particles, which follow verbs, adjectives, and express the relation between predicates, so they join two clauses. Yamada lists only 6 of them, but now is considered a very heterogeneous class. Then we have pragmatic particles, or also called topic and focus particles, which affect the predicate. And Yamada says that they affect the predicate, but contemporary scholarship highlight that they are involved in this theme rim construction called kakari musubi in Japanese, in which the presence of some of these pragmatic particles requires a modification in the inflection of the predicate. And as regards the older stages of the language, Yamada lists the most important ones are topic marking wa and mo, and focus marking zo, namu, and koso. Then we have last 2 final particles, which show the same relation with the predicate as pragmatic particles, but need to be placed sentence finally, and they express hope, order, emotion, and so on. And then we have interjectional particles, which have no effect on the structure of the proposition and convey an emotional overtone or emphasis, and their position is free. So the one proposed by Yamada seems a very clear-cut classification, actually, but as a matter of fact, it is not. And drawing a line between case particles, pragmatic particles, and other classes of particles, as Yamada claims to be the first to do, is actually complicated by his approach to the concept of case. That is kaku or ikaku in Yamada. The two terms are synonyms, he says. In fact, even though contemporary scholarship adopts this notion and the case particle notion in the description of Japanese following Yamada's theorization, Yamada's interpretation of case and its difference from the Western approach is unfortunately one of the most neglected aspects of his work. So Yamada explains that he borrowed the concept of case, that is kaku or ikaku, from the Western grammars, especially from English case and German casus. He quotes the foreign words. We should notice, however, that historically the term kaku means literally rule or rank, and even ikaku is a compound made of two terms that mean rank. And kaku would be standardized as a translation of the word case, so from the Western terminology, as a result of the introduction of grammars about Dutch, but also English and German, that were translated into Japanese in the 18th or 19th century. So Dutch grammar showed either 4 or 6 cases, borrowed of course from the Latin tradition. And similarly, the Japanese scholars started to identify either 4 or 6 cases, so 4 or 6 kaku, which were expressed in Japanese by particles. However, the Yamada's definition of case is peculiar because Yamada says that case, that is ikaku or kaku, is the fixed rule occurring when using a concept word. And this fixed rule or fixed qualification, he says, in the usage of a concept word is intended as the relation that concept words have with each other. So we need to recall that concept words in Yamada's theory are nouns, pronouns, numerals, verbs, adjectives, everything except the particles. So it follows that case is not applied only to nouns and pronouns, but as we would expect, but to each part of the speech belonging to the concept word category. So case is expressed also in Yamada by verbs, adverbs, and even interjections in his theory. The relation words, on the other hand, have the sole function to showcase, so they are only supporting components. I'm quoting Yamada's terminology. So Yamada concludes that case is the fixed qualification that a constitutive element of the sentence keeps in the relation of the composition of the sentence. So Yamada's interpretation strongly differs from our understanding of the concept of case. I'm here quoting only 2 expressions, only 2 definitions, the one by Blake and the other one is taken from the Oxford Handbook of Case. But we know that in general, in the Western tradition, case applies to nouns and pronouns especially. However, in Yamada, conversely, Yamada applies to case to each constituent of the proposition, excluding the particles, and case is a category used to specify the role or the function that each constituent has in a given context. So his application of the notion of case to concept words in general, and not only to nominals, how we would do in the Western tradition, leads him to identify 8 cases, only 3 of which are linked specifically to nominals and resemble the cases of the Western tradition. So we have vocative, nominative, and supplementary cases, which more or less overlap the accusative, the dative, and so on. And then we have other 5 cases which apply to other parts of the speech. About them, I will deal briefly because they are the ones that we are not familiar with. And then we will deal with the cases of the nominals. We show several problematic issues as well. So as regards these not nominal cases, Yamada acknowledges a specific function, so a specific case for the predicative element. So we have the predicative case in Yamada. Predicative case can be expressed by a unitary device. So for example, here the adjective hana uruwashi in the expression hana uruwashi. Uruwashi means beautiful, and in Japanese does not need the copula. So uruwashi alone expresses the predicative case in Yamada. But Yamada highlights that the possibility for the predicative case to be expressed by other specific constructions. So for example, we have the construction with the light verb suru, or constructions that involve the adjective gotoshi, which means to be like, or constructions made of a predicating noun plus the copula. For example, here in these sentences, we have omoi, which is a verbal noun followed by suru, the light verb. And then we have adverb kaku, which means this way or thus, which is followed by the adjective gotoshi, to be like. And then we have the noun yuki, snow, which is followed by the copula, the old copula nari in classical Japanese, more or less. However, these nouns or adverbs, so omoi, kaku, and yuki, are given by Yamada a specific case which he calls hinkaku. Hinkaku was a term used by scholars before him with the meaning of accusative, but Yamada himself translates it incorrectly with predicate, with the English word predicate. So in Yamada, we find 2 cases concerning the predicate. The predicate has its own case, regardless of the device expressing it. But one of these devices can be the constructions made of a hinkaku that he calls omoi, kaku, and yuki, plus copula, light verb, or adjective to be like. Then we have modifier cases, which are assigned cases too. So we have a nominal case, which is expressed by nominals, adjective, or attributive forms of the verb that modify the nominal. So for example, umega ed branch oplum would be an adnominal case, or saku is a relative clause, so it would be an adnominal case. Or we have the modifier case, which is another modifier case, one of the two modifier cases. It is generally expressed by adverbs whose function is, of course, to modify verbs or adjectives. So, for example, kaku itari, thus he spoke, or this way he spoke. Kaku is an adverb and it expresses the modifier case. So Yamada's definition of the two cases of the modifier is, we can see, specifically functional and has nothing to do with formal aspects. So what modifies nominal expresses a nominal case, and what modifies verbs or adjectives expresses the modifier case. And lastly, we have the conjunctional case, whose function is to join two nominals or two clauses, and it is expressed by conjunctions such as matawa, which means or katsu, which means and. So it is curious because we do not see any conjunctional particles, and this is peculiar because Yamada said that the function of conjunctional particles was indeed to join two clauses, but they are not mentioned here. So Yamada's explanation of cases not concerning the nominals help us understand a few aspects of his theory, because for starters, particles have the role to express the relation between two concept words, but cases like predicative ones or conjunctional one are not conveyed by particles at all. And second, case concerns the syntagmatic relations that hold among all the elements of the sentence, so not only nominals, as opposed to contemporary understanding of the notion of case. And then we have the case acknowledgement in Yamada depends on purely functional aspects and has very little to do with formal aspects. The nominal cases further confirm the little importance that case particles have to express case in Yamada's theory. So we have, for example, the vocative case. The vocative case is, Yamada states that it is conveyed only by nominals, so nouns and pronouns, and that the nominal expressed in the vocative case holds no relation whatsoever with the other elements of the sentence. Formally, however, it can be expressed only by interjectional particles, like you can see in the first example here, as on ya, or without any particle, like in the second example here, iza kodomo plus 0 particle. So the vocative further confirms our hypothesis that case and case particles are not so strictly connected. And later on, the nominative further strengthens this view because Yamada states that each verb or adjective has an element as its center and explains something about this. This is the nominative, and the word expressed by the nominative, he says, is the subject of the sentence. In a later text, he would add that the nominative case expresses the main notion explained by the predicate. So I believe that these definitions suggest that Yamada's concept of the nominative reminds more of a topic in a topic-comment relation rather than a grammatical subject or a semantic agent. And so the nominative topic would be the core of the explanation of the predicate comment, whose function is to explain something about the nominative itself. So this is further confirmed by the diversity of formal strategies that Yamada acknowledges to express the nominative case. As you can see here, we have tsuki plus 0, which is a nominative case, tori ga, in which tori is followed by a case particle, which is a nominative case, and ware mo, in which ware ai is followed by a pragmatic particle and is regarded as a nominative case. So the nominative, Yamada says that it may be expressed by different kind of devices, which are 0 particle, case particles, adverbial, interjectional, or pragmatic particles. So not only case particles. And the centrality of the nominative over the remaining nominal cases, I believe, is further confirmed by the fact that Yamada includes all the other nominal cases in a general category called supplementary case, which have the function of completing the meaning of the predicate. So these cases are expressed by the following case particles. So we have ni, o, ni, to, e, yori, and so on. And we should notice a few interesting aspects of these supplementary cases in Yamada, because first, Yamada does not assign any Western-like terminology. So we do not, he does not show any accusative or dative expression in this section. And he labels these cases only after the particle by which they are expressed. So we have case o, case ni, and so on. Then the attributive morphemes no and ga are, of course, not mentioned as devices expressing supplementary cases because he already acknowledged the nominal case, which is expressed by no and ga in attributive function. And third, unlike the nominative, the supplementary cases need to be expressed by case particles only. So pragmatic adverbial interjection on particles and so on are not mentioned in this section. And this is curious because we will see that Yamada acknowledges in other section the fact that O and Ni may be replaced by pragmatic or adverbial particles and not only combined with them. But it seems to confirm that the nominative has a special status among the nominal cases due to its relation to the predicate. So what emerges from his account is that case particle as a category in Yamada's framework show no exclusive connection with the category of case, with the category of kaku, so with the function by which they are defined. So in fact, on one hand, Yamada states that case need to be expressed by particles and acknowledges the peculiar category of case particles whose specific function is to express case relations. But on the other hand, case can be expressed by several different kinds of strategies in Yamada's actual examples. So as far as case of the nominals are concerned, it can be expressed by zero, case, interjectional, pragmatic particles, so every kind of particles except the conjunctional ones. But the other cases can be conveyed also by verbs, adjective, adverbs, and so on. Lastly, I will hint at another aspect that allows us to further question the category of case particles and to weaken its distance from the pragmatic particles like the topic, marker, wa, or mo, both on functional and on formal level. So on the functional level, contemporary scholarship has been proving for the last 20 years that some particles that are traditionally included among the case particles category convey different pragmatic information as well. So for example, I'm here mentioning ga and o. Ga in the written variety is usually believed to be fully grammaticalized in a subject marker, which would explain the nominative label often applied to it. However, in contemporary spoken variety, ga seems to show an informative level, informative value because its usage is particularly rare. It happens only 10% of the time. It's pragmatically motivated, so new information, agentivity, focus, and so on. Not limited to agent subjects, because in desiderative and potential construction, ga can replace o in focus mark in the marking of focused objects. And fourth, ga is starting, it seems, to be used also as a pure focus marker in constructions like koko karaga, from here, highly focused in strongly informal languages. So it seems to be shifting into a pure focus marker. And similarly, wo marking has been connected by contemporary scholarship to pragmatic aspects, because as happens with ga in the written variety, it is usually believed that it grammaticalized in an obligatory object marker. Whereas in contemporary spoken Japanese, o marking seems to be connected to pragmatic parameters, such as the expression of new information or the following topicalization or contrastive usage or contrastive focus and so forth. Some scholars even argue that ga and o in contemporary spoken Japanese take part in a complex system of nominal encoding that has mostly to do with saliency and not with grammatical aspects, together with other particles like wa, or with the zero marking, or with the post-predicative encoding. Formally, we should suggest, and I'm closing, that the strong link that particles like ga and o have with pragmatic values may be the source of their particular syntactic behavior, because already Yamada noticed in 1908 that in classical texts, both adverbial and pragmatic particles could combine with case particles. So for example, with to, with two exceptions specifically. The one exception is the subject case particles, so ga and no, which can only be replaced by and not combined with the other particles. And the other exception is o and ni, that can both be replaced or combined with, for example, pragmatic particles. Now, the situation is slightly different in contemporary Japanese, but implies a similar distinction between more replaceable syntactic particles and not replaceable semantic particles. Contemporary scholarship ascribes this phenomenon to a supposed internal hierarchy of cases, so nominative over accusative over dative over other cases. But it is possible that this particular syntactic behavior has to do with the pragmatic value that this particle convey. However, this hypothesis is just preliminary and needs to be investigated further. So all these aspects allow us to question Yamada's distinction between case and pragmatic particles that cannot be interpreted, I believe, as a clear-cut division, and is not applicable as it is to the Japanese linguistic description. The two cases, I think, may be rather seen as extremes of a single continuum, both on formal and on functional grounds. At one endpoint of the continuum, we find morphemes expressing specific semantic roles like kara, which can be replaced by topic, which cannot be replaced by topic and focus markers or by zero. But on the other hand, we have morphemes that show purely informative values like wa, that can be at the other endpoint. And in the central section, we find morphemes such as ga or o, whereby ga would be further shifting towards the pragmatic endpoint in contemporary spoken Japanese. So I'm closing with the conclusive remarks because in conclusion, this investigation on Yamada's approach allows us, I believe, to reevaluate the category of case particles as defined by Yamada himself and applied by contemporary scholarship, and allows us also to reconsider its sharp distinction with the class of pragmatic particles and even question his application of the category of case to Japanese. Because we saw that Yamada's interpretation of the notion of case is distant from our understanding of this category, because Yamada's case is intended as the function that each element of the proposition has. So each element is assigned a specific case with the exception of the particles. Then it follows that case particles are not the sole strategy which is used to express case, because when case is assigned to verb, adjective, conjunctions, or whatever, particles are not usually in charge of expressing case. And even when case is assigned to nominals, it can be conveyed by all kinds of particles rather than case particles only. And third, in Yamada, case and case particles seem to interact with information structure, because we saw that Yamada's definition of the nominative seems to suggest a confusion between semantic, morphological, and pragmatic or informative level. And second, the fact that only syntactic particles can be replaced by zero or by pragmatic particles as opposed to semantic case particles like kara that cannot be replaced, can be explained by the fact that they convey also pragmatic value. So that case and pragmatic particles can be probably understood as extremes of a single continuum. And in the future, I'm closing, in the future, I intend to do a thorough investigation of the application of the category of case before Yamada to see if he was influenced by other scholars. And second, to understand the reciprocal relation between case and pragmatic particles on a diachronical point of view, in order to understand it, even in the earlier stages of the language, that cannot be interpreted as a clear-cut division, but as a continuum, as in contemporary spoken Japanese. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Corinne, for a most interesting talk. And I didn't say anything about time limit, but we have 30 minutes for each talk, and it's up to a particular speaker to decide how much time he or she wants to leave for questions. So we have 8 minutes for questions.
I recall that it was 20 minutes for the presentation and 10 minutes for the questions. So I went with 22. But...
Approximately 20 minutes, but it's up to you to decide how much time. You can spend some time, you know, maybe more than 20 minutes for your talk, but then you have less time for questions. Okay, but we still have at least 7 minutes for questions. Please, questions, please. So, any questions, any comments? So,
it's too early in the morning, I believe.
Too early, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. It's too early, yeah. It's too early. Okay.
Yeah. May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Thank you for the most exciting talk. I have a question about the terminology and its etymology in particular. You mentioned that Yamada coined the term kaku under the influence of Rangaku, the study of Dutch. But I didn't really understand the connection between the term case and kaku, which means rank in Japanese. How did he come up with this term? That's the first question. And the second one is related, I guess. As you said, Yamada doesn't really differentiate between different cases of Japanese and nominative, accusative, and calls them kaku. So I was wondering, who coined the terms like sukaku, yokaku, kokaku, etc.? Because in my experience, the Japanese use them to, these terms are used in Japanese descriptions of foreign languages, but never applied to the description of Japanese itself.
Okay, thank you for your question. So the first about kaku, actually, he wasn't the first to coin the term kaku or to apply the translation of case, the meaning of case to the term kaku. It was already used in 1 century, I believe, before him. And the first time I found them, but I don't know if it is the actual first time, but the first time I found them was on the translations of the grammars of Dutch. So 1 century more or less before him. Because they usually, like in a Kambun Kundoku strategy, more or less, they usually had the Dutch text, and above the line of the Dutch text, they were translating kanji per kanji, each word of the Dutch text. And when the Dutch text had case as an expression, they used the term kaku. Before kaku, it was used in Siddham studies, so in Sanskrit studies in Japanese, they used the term hattenjo sho, hattenjo. So we have hachi, 8, 10, which means like roll or something like this, and hattenjo, and jo means is koe, is voice. So that kanji was used also in, for example, gender descriptions or number descriptions, or voice descriptions, so for tenses, for example, so for verbal descriptions. But kaku was used, I believe, for the first time for the Dutch translations of the grammars, and then it expanded on the descriptions of Japanese itself. So it was applied to the role of the case particles, or what Yamada would have called case particles later on. And the second question was the terminology of cases, right? So Yamada actually does not use that in application to Japanese. He uses them on when he is explaining, for example, the cases of English, because he more or less knew English and knew something of German and knew something of Sanskrit too. So when he was explaining English or German or other European languages, he used that terms, so yokaku, shukaku, and so on. But he does not use them applying to Japanese. And those terms actually come from Rangaku too, or from, some of them come from Chinese studies. Because, for example, when Chinese try to explain Sanskrit morphology to the Sanskrit learners, but I'm talking about the 6th century after Christ, 6th or 7th century. So for example, Xuanzang, those scholars, when they tried to explain what the nominal inflection was like in Sanskrit, they didn't know any morphological way to explain it in Chinese. So they used metaphors, either metaphors or semantic explanation for cases. So for example, Xuanzang, when explaining the nominative, he said that it expresses the substance. So we have tai in Japanese, and that explains because, the fact that the nominative is either shukaku or taikaku, for example. Then we have tai, which means body, that tai. So, for example, they come either from the Chinese tradition or from the Rangaku tradition, let us say that. But Yamada does not use them applying to Japanese. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Thank you very much. Professor Golovko, we cannot hear you if you're speaking.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm on again. So we have maybe 1 more minute for a very brief question, if there are any. Any brief questions? No questions. Thank you very much for your most interesting talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.